for authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Sandra Corcoran. And we're going to be talking about her book, Shamanic Awakening, if I'm pronouncing that right, Shamanic Awakening?
Shamanic, yeah.
Shamanic, okay. And this is going to be her first time on my show, so I hope she enjoys it here. If anybody wants to call in and ask questions, pardon me, folks, the number's at the top of the page. It's 832-632-7904. And you can also ask questions in chat. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about her website is www.starwalkervisions.com. And before we get the show on the road, I want to remind everybody once again that Talk Now Radio is listener supported, and your support does help keep the sponsors out so that we can bring, information to you that a lot of sponsors may not want to sponsor us if they decided they didn't like the information that was being put out. So, Sandy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. And yourself, Royce?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm having a pretty good day today so far. So, I wanted to ask you real quickly, I get this show off the road with, why don't you tell the listeners a little something about yourself and what it was that kind of led you to write about this Shamanic Awakening?
Okay. Well, I was a special needs educator, and I was doing what my parents considered some fairly normal work. And I lost my first daughter. She died after open heart surgery at 18 months old. And I was devastated, as any parent who has had that horrible thing happen, whether the child is a young child or an older child. We never expect to outlive our children. And at that point, I was approached randomly by some Native American women at different points in my life who said that they were here to teach me. And in that process of the grief, which I consider the darkness I was in, along with some very deep subsequent losses that happened in my life, these indigenous wisdom keepers taught me what they knew about their traditions and their ceremonies, and actually put my feet back onto a place of being able to walk more into daylight. And that's how the book got its title.
Yes, I noticed in the very beginning you were, I guess we could describe it as pretty well lost and driving around aimlessly to escape the pain and things of this nature. And you actually ran into somebody in a building that had a kind of like a retreat or a workshop going on that you didn't even expect to meet, that seemed to know a little something about you and took you by surprise.
Yes, I used to, in the weeks that followed my daughter's death, I would just go out and drive aimlessly around to kind of, in my solace and my grief, to kind of hide from the world and kind of shutter myself in the car. And on this particular evening, it was raining very heavily, and I had to use the facilities. And I drove up to this place that had a light shining, and it seemed like the light was beckoning me, and it was the only place in the area where I thought I might be able to take care of my needs. And when I walked in, it was a workshop area, and there was a Native American woman speaking that night. And I don't know what made me stop. I don't know what glued me to my seat, because I didn't anticipate to go. I wasn't asked to pay anything when I walked into the room. I didn't even remember to this day any of the words she spoke to me, but at the end, I went up to approach her to thank her for what I didn't know, other than maybe being in a different set of circumstances for that given night. And she wouldn't look at me. And she told me that she understood now why she had come to speak, that I was one of the reasons that she had come, that I had made a promise, a great mystery, that I would work with other people, and that she was there to teach me. And she kind of took no prisoners. And I showed up the next day not anticipating that I would do anything because I was still a boatload mess of emotions. And I was about to leave and sneak out because I didn't know if she would ever know who I was or find me again. And she was waiting at the door for me and told me to get myself together, that she needed to get started and I needed to get started. And that was the beginning of 30 years of work with different Native peoples in North, South, and Central America.
So are you still friends with this woman?
This woman is quite aged now. She does not see people anymore. All my other mentors have passed away. They were all quite old when I met them. They were all in their late 70s, early 80s, 90s, and they have all passed away.
So they kind of like pass the torch along to you, you being the younger generation.
Well, I am, and I know a lot of First Nations people don't want non-natives to step in and teach any of their work, but all of my indigenous elders told me that it didn't matter the race, the color, or the creed. If you were speaking from the heart and if you were carrying on the traditions, that's what was important. And I've been very lucky in my life to not only have had those teachers, but to be received very warmly when I do go out and teach the work.
Well, one of the things that you were saying earlier and that I read in the book about this here situation is that this lady had no clue that she was even there for you until after she actually saw you. I hear that from a lot of people that's into spiritual work of different types. In other words, that a lot of times they'll go places not knowing the wherefore or why until they're actually there.
I think that's true. That has even happened to me over the years doing my work in different countries or in different parts of the United States, that somebody will show up in the workshop or in the teachings, and it's very clear that they're one of the reasons that I'm there. And whether I do something with them privately because of their own skill set or their desire for the work or even the grief they're in, I often find that that is the case. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think someone would say that basically they just they feel a need to go somewhere or be at a certain place at a certain time, and they just more or less trust their intuition and instinct and just go and figure it out later.
I think that's true. I think one of the things a lot of us hold back on is when we get an instinctual or an intuitive hit, we don't give it the credence that it's worth, and we don't act on it. And actually, in any endeavor, the most important part is the action. Without action, nothing occurs. So if you don't listen to what your inner whisperings are sharing with you, you often miss amazing opportunities.
Yeah, because you can't see what the future holds, and a lot of times you don't know what your simple act, what fruits it has that you had no way to foresee, and sometimes you get to see later on and sometimes you don't, I think.
I think that's true, and I think, as a global society, there's just so many of us now. We're closer and closer to each other, if not by proximity, just by what we're thinking, because those thoughts reach out to other people. And, I do believe that you can sometimes be in the most perfect place at the most perfect time, and the right person will come by either to be your teacher or for you to teach, because I think we're all here to do that with each other. There's people at different levels of consciousness and different levels of capacity to teach, but I think even at our most base level, we're all teachers and students for each other. And I think if we lose sight of that level of superiority and one-upmanship really takes away from the common good for everybody.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've seen it interfere before. So did you have any kind of a particular purpose for, writing this book? Was it just meant for sharing purposes, or is it meant to, hopefully help some people that might have been there in your position before that was able to relate, or, did you have anything in mind in particular?
Well, when I first started writing it, I was in a very tough space again. I had just been asked by my now ex-husband for a divorce, and it was very difficult for me because I found out that there were many parts of our marriage that he hadn't been honest about. And so I felt really devastated. And as a person who does a lot of work intuitively with people and also as a psychotherapist, I felt really ashamed and really lost. And when I left, the circumstances, suddenly the words started coming out of me. And it made sense that I would take my experiences, because we all experience loss. I don't care who we are, rich, small, of means, black, white. We're all going to depart this world with some level of loss, some level of grief. Nobody's immune from that. And it just became a vehicle for me to express myself and the teachings I've had so that I could share those with other people, and at the same time really humbled me because I began to understand once again people on a much deeper level with their pain as they came to me as they read the book. So I felt like I was humbling myself, but at the same time I felt very blessed because other people were receiving something from it that they could use to help themselves.
Which is, of course, pretty good. Now, I would imagine that a book like this could probably help somebody with, say, I don't know, maybe depression.
Yes, I think so. With loss, with grief, with death, with divorce. It touches on quite a few things.
Okay. Does it do anything to deal with, because I didn't make it quite all the way through the book. I ran out of time. But I got about 20 books behind, so I hate to admit to this here, but I had your book for a while. I was trying to set you up for an interview, but I was trying to catch up all the books and have a chance to read all yours before I did. And at some point I had to say I'm getting too far behind on my shows. I have to go with what I got and go ahead and have the interviews.
Well,
But I was going to say, did it have anything to do with, well, I had a certain thing in mind just a minute ago before I explained all of that. No, go ahead with what you was going to say, and I'll think about that because I lost my place.
Well, I was just going to say that the book, you know, when you talk about death and dying, I don't want people to think this is a macabre book or a book all about grief. It really is a book about light and hope and all the different realities that can impact us as human beings if we open our perceptions and take a chance on realizing that life is bigger than just the moment we're living, the grief we're perceiving, the loss we're encountering. It's so much bigger than that and richer than that. And spirit, whether you want to call that God or great mystery or the absolute, there is something far greater than us that doesn't want us to suffer. And I think what the book helps people possibly see is that there are many ways to get back to center, many ways to get back to the light, many opportunities to see the good and the bad. And so this really isn't a book about grief and loss and death. It's really a book about how my different native and indigenous experiences gave me back a piece of myself. And in that process, along that way, I hope to use some of the teachings I was given to share as teachings with other people who chance to read the book.
Well, did you do any training with any Cherokee by any chance?
You know, I didn't, but there was, my longest mentor was Grandmother Twyla Nietzsche of the Seneca people, the Iroquois Five Nations people, and one of her dearest friends was a Cherokee elder. So there were times when I was with her that he would come. He was an herbalist. He was a chief. He was a very quiet, statuesque man. And, you know, she was so full of life, she would always taunt him to get up and dance. and I was very blessed early on to be in certain situations when I was with the elders in a more quiet way of meeting other elders that would come and visit.
If I remember correctly, I think I read that Cherokee was one of the members of the Five Nations.
They were moved. Unfortunately, the people, and that's how any of the indigenous tribes speak of themselves as the people, they were a group that was moved so often to, you know, between the Trail of Tears and moved out of New England down to the Carolinas, and they were a very strong, noble people, and they really had a very hard time of it.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. But now, when dealing with Native Americans, don't the biggest majority of the tribes have their own shamans?
Yes, every indigenous group has its own elders, its own herbalist, its own medicine men, its own medicine women. What started happening in the 70s and 80s where different Native people came into the circuit to start to teach other people who came to them from the outside world. And I think part of the reason for that is many of the tribes have, or many of the nations have myths and stories that say that at some point those that had once tried to destroy them, their children would come back to learn from them. And I have been very blessed in the fact that any of my teachers, Sun Bear, Grandfather Wallace Black Elk, Grandmother Twyla Neach, Grandmother Kitty, they didn't, all they held you responsible for was to grow yourself, stay in your heart, and whatever they taught you, not to change the teachings. But they didn't care if you were white or Native because they knew they wanted their teachings to move forward for 7 generations. And
so it's almost like you were a prophecy fulfilled.
There were many of us that were that, and I don't claim any rights to being a Native American or saying that I wouldn't be totally respectful if an elder told me not to teach a certain thing, but all my elders that I worked with have given me permission to teach the things that I do teach, which is mainly to be aware of nature, to be aware of your ancestors, to take care of your children and the earth, to be responsible for all that the earth gives us without greed and need. And to me, it's just a conscientious way of living.
Well, before us white folks came over from overseas, it was my given knowledge that aside from a very few tribes, the vast majority of the Indians lived together in harmony, virtually almost crime-free. And, they had their own set of values, much like the Chinese had, dealing with when it comes to honoring authority and how you treat the elders and, obedience and things of that nature. I don't know about you, but I kind of tend to think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that they tend to raise up kids of a better nature, better stature.
Well, I think, number one, the world was a smaller place. It was a more isolated place. I think family groups and family units stayed together, though like any family, there's going to be diversity and there's going to be a need to work through personalities. Unfortunately, I think what the European nations have done is to claim things without being grateful and to take things without asking. And in that sense, even in terms of how we treat our elders, I mean, what do we do with them? We put them in
old folks'
homes. We put them out of sight. The elders are rich in the ancestry of what is still a piece of us. And when we destroy that and throw that away, it's like destroying the earth. We throw away a part of our lineage, a part of our history, a part of the wealth of who we are as human beings. And I do think at some point there has to be a reckoning for that.
I'm pretty sure there probably will be at some point. In fact, it could be in the everyday life that they live and the quality of it.
That's true. That's true. You see more and more people who are frightened and afraid, and yet on the same hand, I run across people worldwide who the most important thing they want is to just have their children have a safe place and food on their table and be warm. So I think at our most basic and human place, we all have the same desires and needs. It's when that sense of lack and limitation that somebody else's light or need is shining brighter than ours that we get fearful, and that's when we start to take instead of give.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Now, out of curiosity, what exactly would you say would be the job description of a shaman?
Well, first of all, the word shaman comes from the Russian Tuntsik language, and even though it's entered the natural lexicon of the world at this point, native elders never called themselves medicine men or healers or even shaman. That was a designation that the people gave them in recognition for the work that they did and the abilities and skill sets they had. But I think at its core, somebody who works in the realms of inter and multidimensional space, which is how I don't call myself a shaman. I do shamanic work, but I don't consider myself a shaman. I would never call myself that, just out of respect. But I think somebody who works in those realms is able to work with nature, with the elements. They have to be accountable because what you put out comes back to you. They have to work from a line that moves from their heart to their head because we need both compassion and empathy as well as logic and focus. So I think, somebody who works in that domain is able to work with both the shadow and the light. And I think the biggest thing for all human beings to look at is their shadow side. So many of us pretend it's not there, or we've hidden it, or nobody else can see it, and yet by nature of not addressing our shadow and making it our ally and learning from it, because at some point it can be very supportive, by the very nature of trying to hide it and deny it, that's all that people see. And I think a shaman is really very clear at being able to pick up on that quickly.
Now, notice you kept calling this the shadow side. I'm assuming that you're referring to what most of us refer to as the ego. Is that correct?
Not just the ego. I think we all need our ego in this everyday reality to survive. Without an ego, we would collapse. But I think the shadow side is more the wounds and the places where we hide our lack and limitation, or the places that we deny exist within us. In a given moment, in any situation, I think it is quite reasonable to say that any human being can turn to love and any human being can turn to hate. I think holding yourself in check, given the circumstances that are happening, and approaching that situation from a place where you're still coming from your heart, still coming from light and, for lack of a better word, divinity, without sounding grandiose in any way, I think that we all have the capability to be uncentered and to get knocked off course. And instead of accepting that and looking that square in the eye and forgiving ourselves for how we had to learn the lesson, I think what ends up happening is a lot of people deny and bully and abuse, and that really is what the shadow's about. It's all those uncontested parts of ourselves that are afraid to step into the light and say at any given moment, that could be me.
But what they do is act out in order to protect themselves from being seen.
Right. And yet, Royce, you've met probably lots of people in your life. You know when somebody's BSing you. You know when somebody is doing one thing and actually saying something else out of the other side of their mouth. It's a vibration. Language is just a vibration, and when the vibration isn't in tune with the integrity, that is felt by other people.
Well, yeah, you can even feel something, even if you can't see something or smell it or hear it.
Exactly.
You ever be talking to somebody and you never really know quite why, but it just doesn't seem like something's jiving like it should jive, and you go away from that conversation wondering what it was you might have missed?
Or what it was they missed.
But I think a lot of times that's your own intuition trying to tell you something's amiss, and maybe a lot of times it's up to you to figure out what it is, though.
Yes, I agree with that. And nobody else is going to give you that gift. That gift resides in all of us, to many in greater or lesser degrees, because it's like a foreign language. I'm not going to be able to speak French tomorrow just because I've been exposed to a French dinner and a French-speaking person. But if I wanted to learn French and I immersed myself in the teachings and the language, I could use it. Well, intuition is the same way. It's based on vibration. It's based on trust trusting yourself and what you're understanding, but it's also based on not projecting on everything. I mean, sometimes, a crow can be a sign, and sometimes a crow is just a crow. So it's discernment. I think if there's any piece missing sometimes in the equation, it's discernment. You're either giving your power away to somebody else thinking, the priest, the guru, the medicine person knows better than you, instead of understanding we all come to this equal. And it's just a matter of refining our own knowing.
Plus, you never know if that priest or guru or even the shaman is legitimate and on the level, and I'm not saying anything against shamans other than perhaps they're human too, and being human, you could always run into a bad one just like you could a good one.
Absolutely, and I have. And that's one of the things I admire about my teachers. None of them ever let me accept their word just because they had said something. I had to try it out for myself, if it worked for me, if it resonated for me, and they always challenged me to question them. Not out of disrespect or anything like that, but you can't make something your own if you're just yesing somebody and giving your power away because you think they have greater power. And I'll always admire my teachers for that. Every single one of them challenged me, was this real for me? Because if it wasn't real for me, what was the purpose?
As a parent, I've run into that same issue many times with my kids, because they either want to get disrespectful and tell you a lot of extra than what you really need for the purpose of the conversation and, things like that. And if they can't do it, then all of a sudden they don't want to respond at all.
True. And I think a lot of times we've done with our kids exactly what we've done with our elders. We've pushed them in front of the TV or the mall or the video game or handed them another $10 when really we need to hold them accountable. People need to know how to be in service to each other. They need to work. They need to know that what they want to acquire is worth something of their time and effort. And
they need to know that when you do something wrong, you can't just go find a way to get around it. In other words, there are consequences. You ever see a family where, for example, the dad will ground the kids and tell them they can't go outside for 2 days, just say, and they want to go outside, so they go rag on the mom's nerves and hoping that she'll run them outside without even. But then you raise a child that hasn't learned that there's consequences in the process.
Right, but what they have learned very well is how to manipulate.
But you see so much of that coming from grown-ups nowadays.
Well, a lot of grown-ups haven't grown up, Royce. I mean, America is seen as the teenagers of the world. I want, I have, I'll take. And yet we are the most amazing nation in the world, and I truly believe that in terms of when our backs are up against the wall, we give, we aid, we help. I think we're an amazing country. And, you can't tell me that so many other countries don't try and get here or emulate us because we're doing it all wrong, because I don't think we're doing it all wrong.
No, I mean, people wouldn't try to cross the Mexican border illegally if we were doing it all wrong.
Or in ships coming out of Southeast Asia, or 100 other ways other people have tried to get to the United States. We're an amazing country.
I don't know. I've never heard of those. That's not to say they're not happening. It's just, it seems like they only highlight the ones that are closest in, I guess.
Well, you're in Texas, so, I mean, I lived in Houston, Texas for 10 years, and I recognize that because you're close to the border, you have more of a vested interest in that. I think any of the border states probably do. But
so which one you hear the most of depends on where you live at the time.
Exactly. And in all fairness, and I mean this with total respect to the Latino people, who's going to do your lawns and who's going to take care of your kids and all the rest of it that you demand, and yet when it crosses a certain line, you don't want. I think there has to be, again, a lot of accountabilities on both sides of the border. But
I think there needs to be a lot of accountability everywhere in the world. I mean, I think the world was probably a lot more, responsible for itself back in yesteryear than it is today.
Well, I think, between social media, I mean, everything from radio to Facebook to Match.com to the fact that there are over 7 billion people on the planet. We're a lot of people on a planet that can't support that much without there being a lot of overlap. And I think we're probably in the midst of that now, just so many people on such a small, beautiful planet that there's no place to hide.
Well, let me ask you this. Would the Indians or the Native Americans perhaps teach that there's a shaman in each of us that we could all develop and grow into?
Yes, and that's called an accountable, responsible, compassionate human being.
So basically, the world could probably be a lot better if there was more teachings about this, or this or any other real spiritual type of thing would benefit the world, especially if it was taught to kids at an early age, since a lot of the grown-ups are old and set in their way now.
Well, I think there's a big difference between spirituality and religion. I think a lot of religions, a lot of religions get very dogmatic and very
that's why I steered away from religion and used the word spirituality.
I think everybody, it's only my personal belief, but I believe we all come from that one, and we come as a drop of divinity into these templates and personalities we call bodies. And in this third dimensional reality, we have been gifted with free will, but we're still planting karmic seeds moving forward of what we have to learn and what we have to act on based on how we meet that essence of divinity in ourselves. Because when we go back to the one, to the whole, we bring what we've learned so that the community of the one can learn. And I don't mean to get far out and very esoteric with this, but I do think we're all in this together, and each one of us has to be the best they can in this particular lifetime, because that's the imprint we leave when we leave this earth. Whatever we were able to do, good, bad, or indifferent, that's the imprint we leave energetically, and that's how we'll be known.
Yeah, it's kind of like starting out in a great big ocean of all there is, or if you want to picture the creator or the great spirit as a big ocean who's can actually dissipate into drops that will, and then the drops can always go back and rejoin, separating, coming down to earth and collecting information, going back and giving it to the parent body, and then coming back, getting more and going back and delivering that.
That's a beautiful analogy, Royce.
Which is a long process.
Yes, it's called life.
But I did deliberately use the word spirituality because, well, I used to teach Sunday school. I don't anymore. My dad was a preacher. He's passed on now. And I'm very familiar with religion, but I'm also very familiar with spirituality, and they are very different in my books as well. I would advise to stay away from anything dogmatic.
Yeah, and I would advise that all of us can get to a much more compassionate place when we forgive ourselves for how we've had to learn our lessons and don't do it again. Because to me, that's the sin, when you knowingly do it again, when you know it's not right. And I think we all have the capacity to be accountable for that.
Well, maybe accountable, but do we all have the capacity to remember from one day to the next? I mean, I've known a person that would step in a puddle of water on the ground and touch the washer and get shocked, and then the next day turn around and make the same mistake and get shocked again. That leads me to ask, is everybody capable of remembering their mistakes from day to day?
Depends on how much they want to be shocked. In the native tradition, that's called coyote medicine. Coyote crossed the street and got hit by a car and said, let me cross the street and see what happens, and gets hit by a car going the other way. It's, coyote medicine, you just don't learn the lesson. And yeah, we can all make that choice too, but at its core, it's always a choice.
So you're pretty well sure then that they do have the ability to learn, but there's some reason choosing not to, or they're just choosing not to think at all.
Yeah, choosing not to follow the storyline through to see what's going to happen, and kind of repeating the issue, because it just takes that person longer to learn the lesson. I mean, there are gradations of gray. I mean, because somebody's in the 8th grade, they can't blame somebody who's in the 3rd grade for not getting the lesson. But if both people are in the 8th grade and somebody keeps stepping in the puddle and putting his finger in the wall socket, that's a pretty silly person.
Yeah, it is. But I have seen several people in that life that it seemed like would just continually keep doing that, and I heard people call them their own worst enemy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people self-sabotage. I really do.
Never understood the concept, but I think it does seem to happen. I know me personally, if I can't fathom it, I don't doubt very seriously I'd actually follow through on it myself. I mean, for me, pain's a good motivator.
Well, and I think that's true for most people. I think I think most people learn best through pain, and I think that's why you see so much of it all over the earth. But certainly, we don't need to do it that way, and yet we keep doing it to ourselves and each other, and that's such a sad thing. I mean, I think our Creator wanted us to feel joy. He put us on a beautiful planet to feel the beauty of everything that the planet offers us. He gave us each other to learn and to love and to trust. And for some reason, we all go to the other side of the spectrum on that. It's, in South America, they teach this concept called reciprocity, Aini, and there's 2 spectrums to it. There's the light side and there's the dense side. They don't see it as good and evil, though certainly denseness can hold evil. They see it as the inability to transform that denseness into something more refined, and that more refined energy is the other side of the spectrum, where light and love and accountability and compassion and empathy reside. We all have that choice, that ability to walk that road, that spectrum between dense and light. Why some people continue to choose dense, I don't know. There's 100 reasons for that, and there's 100 reasons why they do that. But when it comes to looking squarely at death in the eye, which one do you want to choose? Because when you bodhisattva out of here, I'm sure you don't want to go to a place where you're just going to be confronted with your own denseness. It's not, as I see it, so much hell where you're going to be punished. It's where you are held accountable to all the pain you created and all the stupid things you did. So you become your own judge and jury. I don't think anybody else does that to you, because ultimately I think God wants all of us back in His arms.
Or you come back and repeat it until you learn not to do it no more.
Yeah, but it gets harder each time.
Yeah, I can think it probably does. So, your book, though, it deals largely with your own personal experiences, but, couldn't people also glean a little bit of, shamanistic, spiritualistic teaching by learning from the mistakes that you shared in your book?
I think so. But everybody's going to make their own mistakes. And everybody's going to have their own aha moments. And, you don't need to have a native teacher or a South American wisdom person or, a medicine bag or a chinumpa or a mesa or any of those other accoutrements. Those aren't what give you the power. So many people nowadays feel that, if I buy the angel book and if I buy the big crystal and if I buy the drum, that's going to give me the power. The power is already in you. It's how you awaken it. And those accoutrements are just there for you to help awaken that energy. They aren't the power. And I think that's one of the tough things the New Age has done with all these different
doctrines.
Well, no, the different tools everybody uses, right, to be the healer, to be the angel reader, to be the crystal healer. Many years before he died, and I was sitting with Sun Bear, one of the things he said is, if you can't do your work stark naked in the middle of the desert without your drum and your fancy feather or your pipe, you're not the healer. You're only the owner of a very fancy drum or chinoopa or feather. In other words, that's not what gives you the power. The empowerment comes from standing in your center and doing and making the choices that help bring more refined energy into the world and helping each other get to that point. In Peru, there's another story where if you and I run to the top of the mountain, the way it has to work is I teach you how to beat me the next time. Because to be a strong community, we have to help each other climb on each other's shoulders to be stronger as a group of people, not as individuals. That the reward lies in the community or the family reaching the goal in some capacity together, not one person doing it and getting all the glory or all the money or all the acknowledgement.
I was just listening to you and passages from the Bible, and bear in mind I'm not into religion anymore, but I still don't think the Bible is totally 100% flawed. I think it's got some good teaching and some add-ins in there both. Just kind of got to figure out which is which. But one of the things I keep remembering is Jesus' teachings about faith, and it was dawning on me while I was listening to you that he would never once anywhere in the New Testament healed anybody unless their faith was there first. They, according to your faith, let it be done unto you, for example. And you were telling me about all you own is that, feather and that drum, that fancy drum, etc. And I got to thinking, you know what? A shaman's probably the same as Jesus. They don't really have the power to heal you either. You're placing your faith, the person that needs the healing is placing their faith either in the shaman or his drum or his ritual and it's actually their faith that these other things are really more or less, faith aids.
That's true. It's not I don't believe it's the shaman who heals you. I believe it's the shaman who holds open the space so you can heal yourself, so that you can change your perception of the situation, so that you can make another choice. And certainly healing doesn't always mean curing. I don't want for a minute for people to think that that the cure is always had. But I have also seen people that have had some life terminal illnesses be cured, and it's not because necessarily the shaman did it. It's because it brought you to that place within yourself where you could shift the perception or the hurt or the wound or whatever it was. And you want to go to the Bible. I mean, I think Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad were amazing shamans. I mean, Jesus said, do this like me and you will be able to heal.
Right.
In the Bible, he basically says, if you walk the path I'm walking, in other words, if you open your heart to the divinity in yourself and the divinity that brought you here, you can touch and heal another person too, because the energy exchange, the higher vibration and frequency of the energy is what allows the other person to amp their energy to make the change within themselves.
Right. Now, I used the Bible because, well, that's the most common thing in my family. Although I'm aware of the Buddha and actually Krishna and others as well. And
yeah.
I believe they were all healers, or like you say, you could call them shamans as well. And some people, I believe, have also called them avatars.
Yep.
I think it's really, these are all different titles, like you were saying earlier, for people who are more spiritually connected?
Yeah, and vibrate at a higher frequency where they're connected with their own divinity. I really believe that there are avatars among us that, Mother Teresa was a primary example of somebody who walked her talk. and I don't think you have to live in the ghettos of India to do that, but I do think there are people that work from a higher vibration in whatever capacity of the work they're doing, because it doesn't always have to be in a healing capacity, and because they're holding the higher intention, those around them can raise their vibration and hold a higher intention for themselves. And I think that's where we start to work as a global community with each other as opposed to against each other.
Where one or more are gathered in my name, there I will be also. But that's really a spiritual principle more than it is anything else.
I totally agree with you.
What it's basically saying is where the people are gathered in agreement, that's where the spirit energy is working at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay. I said we got about 14 minutes remaining. I don't want to let you escape without making sure that you got a chance to tell everybody everything you wanted them to know about your book. So is there anything that you'd like to cover?
Well, I cover a lot of different things in the book, as you know. I cover indigenous teachings. I cover interdimensional energies. I cover some Jungian techniques, as well as where I have also tripped, stumbled, and fallen and not believed and questioned and shook my fist at the universe. I think all of us are human, and we all do that at some point in our life. But again, the audience will be my witness, and hopefully if any of this speaks to them or helps them along the way, even if it's only a sentence in the book that makes them look at themselves in a better way, then I will have accomplished what I set out to do.
Well, you know, you was mentioning a minute ago about the people who trip and fall and shake their fists at the universe or at God or their brother or their sister or their friend, their boss, who doesn't really matter. There's blaming posts all around you. But yeah, it kind of reminded me that I look around me in everyday life. It doesn't matter if you're working at a TV rental store, you're at the movies, you're at a restaurant. You could be overhearing conversations at other tables where people are talking loudly, and you'll hear people pointing fingers everywhere you go. It's an almost constant flow of conversation, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think that's because so many people are afraid to claim accountability. You know, I can't change you. I can only change me. But when I agree that some of the things I'm doing don't feel right, don't get the right responses, when I take responsibility for that and change me, then it changes how you react to me. And if you stay on the opposite side of the fence and keep, you know, shooting spitballs at each other, you're just going to have a big wad of wet. You're not going to have any change. Or
you'll have a change for the worse.
But, you know, the only change you can make is the change in yourself. And one of the questions my teacher would ask me, one of my teachers would ask me all the time, Graham Twy again, who was my strongest mentor, she would ask me every morning when I wake up to ask myself, are you happy? If the answer was yes, then you do something kind for somebody else that day. Maybe you smile at the man in the toll booth, or you bring cookies to your neighbor, or you try very hard that day not to judge somebody else, something nobody else would know but you. But if you wake up in the morning and the question is asked, are you happy, and you say no, then what is it you have to change in that day, in that moment? Because what we create today is what we're going to experience tomorrow. It's not about what's going to come next year, next month, 10 years from now. What we do today is what's going to create that. So if I'm not happy today, the only thing I can do is make some changes, even if it's just baby steps. Sometimes it's not always convenient. Sometimes we don't like it. But if you don't try, what's the point?
Well, you know, Sandy, I was just thinking, though, that really goes deeper than just simply your everyday actions and whether or not you smile at somebody or help a guy that's stranded on the side of the road or something. Doesn't that also kind of play the same scenario in your thought life? If today you had a bad day and you're blaming everybody but yourself, you're not taking accountability for it, you're grumbling and griping, aren't you just setting up your future karma to get more of the same of what you're actually sending out?
Sure, because until you change it, you're still accepting a lower frequency.
So you're just keeping yourself on a low frequency loop.
Exactly.
That can also lead to depression. And then because I've heard people that were depressed that would say it's like they have a constant dark cloud. I would imagine if you were in a constant negative loop, you probably would be in a dark cloud all the time.
Yep. But there are things you can do. I mean, if you're in a dark cloud because you're in a bad marriage, or if you're in a dark cloud because you just lost your job, I mean, some of those things are longer term than other just bad days. But you have to look at how you are part of that picture, because all of us, if we are someplace experiencing something, are either there to learn something from it, and the longer we whine about it and complain about it, the longer it's going to take, or we're there to make a change. And the uncomfortableness is not there to punish us. It's there to hurry us into making a change that's going to bring us into a lighter, better, happier place.
And therein lies the, I guess you could call it catch-22, because what a lot of people do, I think, is when they lose their job or a loved one passes on, they're sick a day or whatever the case may be, the first thing they want to do is buck God, buck the system, buck everybody. But they got a choice of doing that or taking it into stride, making the corrections they need to make, and moving forward with a better attitude. So it's really a case of, crying over a self-inflicted wound, as Dr. Phil would say.
Well, and I think a lot of people are wounded, and it wasn't their choice necessarily to be wounded that deeply or in that way. And yet, on some level, pre-birth or at the age and stage they're at, that's what I was referring to before about forgiving yourself for how you had to choose to learn your lesson. At some point, we've all signed up for the lesson. What we don't know is how the lesson is going to come to us. I speak in the book, and this is kind of very dramatic. I don't mean to get to that point, but I speak about how my brother was on the second plane in 9/11. Now, I could have hated a race of people. I could have hated a religion. I could have, been very angry and wanted to go out and create war. That's not what I realized when I sat with it, what I wanted to experience myself. And so if I was going to go to those denser places, I was going to round up a lot of other people to go to that dense place with me.
Misery loves company.
Yeah. And what I realized is that's not what my brother would have wanted. That's not what my family wanted. In essence, that's not what our country wanted. Yes, was it a horrible thing? Yes, did we mourn, close to 3,000 people? But like I was saying at the very beginning, every culture, every people just wants their children to be safe. They want food on their table. They want to know that they're loved by somebody. That is a global understanding. And that was more the place I chose to be, not because I'm Pollyanna and not because I didn't have to work through my anger and grief, but because in the end, that was more important to hold that space, to hold that vibration than to go the other way. And I could have easily made the choice to go the other way.
That is true. I know people who didn't even have family involved that chose to go the other way. Yeah. But, I think you're right about something. I think if you were to look at the vast populace, I mean, the biggest part of the population on a global level, everybody, with brothers, sisters, I mean, your everyday guys.
Yep.
I don't think a single one of them would want to go to war without some kind of motivation, through the media, the government, pushing it, or, pushing their propaganda. And I think most people, they're so busy wanting to hold their job, feed their family, go to the movies, and do the enjoyable things that war's the last thing on their mind. And if they weren't being pushed to join the military and go to war, they probably wouldn't.
Well, I think, any country, any government, any religion, any news media, they all have, at some point, they have their good people, but they all have their crazies and their zealots, too.
It's the zealots in there that I think's the main source of the troubles. Sorry to interrupt.
Again, not speaking from my own history, but from Native history, you asked about the Cherokee people were called the Selagee people. It's funny because we call them Apaches, but the Apache people were the Tenay people. The Crows, who were the scouts for the cavalry, when the Tenay people went by, would say Apache, because that was their word for enemy. Well, the Selagee people, it was the grandmothers, it was the women who decided whether or not the tribes went to war, because those were their children and those sons and the other women's sons from the other tribes that were going to be hurt. So unless it was really mandatory, the woman never allowed the tribes to go to war. I think we need more women in charge, Royce.
Well, at least in charge of the Defense Department. Because I think you make a valid point. Most any mother would be hesitant to go to war with their own children.
Exactly. Or
their own grandchildren. Men are some callous people.
Well, I don't want to slight men. I think men get a tough role in life too. I mean, they're meant to be protectors and they're meant to be gatherers, and sometimes they're just trying to do their role. But I don't know. I think our soldiers are so needed, and yet we do so much to just face them and not help them when they come back and need it. It's a very terrible thing.
Oh, it is sad to think of how veterans get treated. And I'm a veteran myself, and I usually get treated pretty good most of the time. I mean, here in Texas, veterans get treated a lot better than they do in other places, in other words. But I think it's sad the way some of them in some places get treated. And a lot of people have actually blamed the veterans for the wars, and the veterans didn't start anything. They were available to protect their country. It's the governments that start the wars.
That's right. And it's generally not even over, it's not generally over what we're told it's over. We send these young men, these young, vibrant men with families, or in the beginnings of wanting a family, we send them off. They lose limbs and their minds and go into post-traumatic stress. And how do we help them? We don't, because they
end up beggars on the street.
They become a commodity.
That never should have been put on the street to begin with.
No, it's exactly what we do to our elders. It's exactly what we're doing with our children. We are no longer families and communities. We're just a bunch of people looking for what?
Loving all the wrong places?
Yeah, there's no spirit attachment anymore.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest problems is people lost contact with their spirit years ago, and most of their actions are based going off their emotions and their egos.
Yeah.
And it created a huge imbalance.
Yes, I think there is a huge imbalance, and I think it starts, up at the top. It starts with the heads of the families, and then it starts with the heads of the states, and then the heads of the larger governments and the heads of the countries. I mean, people need to start to learn to act from their egos, from their hearts, not from their egos.
Right. I'm about to say, not the egos. But, our show is 8 o'clock. I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to remind everybody else, once again, that you can learn more about her at www.starwalkervisions.com. And I'm going to be posting this to YouTube, probably most likely tomorrow, unless something occupies my time. And I'll be posting this to my archive as well. It's going to take me a little time, folks, to put her picture with my picture into the movie maker and to turn it into a video instead of just a audio format, since YouTube won't take it unless it's in video format. But tomorrow, the next day, I should be able to get it up. And Sandy, I'll be sending you links to the archives. There'll be 3 of them. And
okay.
Hopefully, with luck, when you get ready to have some more information for my listeners, you'll be willing to come back.
I would love that. And I was so honored that you asked me to join you tonight, Royce. I really thank you very, very much. And I thank your listeners for taking the time to listen to some of the things I might have said.
Okay. I hope that you hear from some of these listeners as well. But I can tell you right now, the biggest part of them are going to hear you in the archives. My show here at the site does not get near as many live listeners as the show I do at Revolution Radio gets.
Okay.
This one gets mostly archives. That one gets mostly live. I think it's because they have like 60 shows there every day, every 24 hours. So there's always a live show. Over here it's just mine, and it's on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Saturdays. So, it's easier to go to one where you're going to have something there every time you go there, in other words.
Sure. Well, anytime in the future, and I wish you very, very well as you move forward, and I thank you again.
All right, we thank you very much, and everybody, y'all have a good night. Don't forget to come see me tomorrow. I'll be talking to Tamarack Sung and his